Princess Catherine just did something the palace almost never allows. And the reason behind it was far more emotional than anyone expected. This was not a formal bulletin. Not one of those carefully polished royal statements passed through layers of advisors, rewritten until every feeling disappears. No. This time Catherine sat down alone, looked at the script they had prepared for her, and pushed it aside. Then she spoke in her own words. Not as a royal figure. Not as a future queen. But as a mother. And what she revealed about Prince Louis and the private recovery journey the family had been protecting for months changed everything. Because the palace had been silent for so long that people began to notice. Engagements were being rearranged. Schedules kept shifting. And the youngest prince was nowhere to be seen. No explanation was given. That silence was deliberate. From the beginning, Prince William had argued for privacy. He believed silence would shield Louis from speculation, headlines, and the kind of public scrutiny royal children live under almost from birth. Catherine understood that instinct completely. But somewhere along the way, she realized something heartbreaking. The silence was beginning to send the wrong message. Louis had started to believe his condition was being hidden because the family felt ashamed of it. And that one detail changes the entire story. Because now this was no longer just about privacy. It was about what silence can do to a child who is already frightened, already exhausted, and already trying to make sense of something he cannot fully understand. When you look at the timeline, the truth becomes even more revealing. Prince Louis had been recovering from complications linked to a serious respiratory illness. At first, the family thought it was just a seasonal infection, the kind children get all the time. But it quickly became clear that this was different. The tiredness did not lift. His appetite disappeared. One morning, he pushed away his breakfast without a word, pointed to his chest, and quietly told William that he was too tired to eat. That was the moment fear entered the room for real. But the true turning point came during a private rehearsal at Windsor. It was supposed to be gentle. No cameras. No crowds. No pressure. Just a quiet practice before any possible public return. Then, in the middle of the morning, Louis stopped. He reached for his mother's hand and whispered that he could not catch his breath. Catherine dropped to her knees beside him immediately. She wrapped both hands around his and felt how cold his fingers had become, even in the warmth of the room. William reacted instantly. He ordered everyone out except the medical team. He made sure George and Charlotte were taken elsewhere, because he refused to let either of them witness their brother struggling like that. That moment changed everything inside the household. From the outside, the palace still projected calm. Behind closed doors, the family was living inside fear. William insisted that every engagement involving Louis be suspended immediately. To him, no ceremony was more important than his son's health. And honestly, that is hard to argue with. But senior aides warned that repeated absences would raise questions. In royal life, when a prince suddenly disappears from public view, people notice. And when no explanation comes, speculation fills the silence. The advisors wanted a controlled statement before rumors took over. William refused. He would not allow his son's recovery to become public conversation while the child was still scared and uncertain. He wanted privacy to be protection. But the silence was affecting more than just Louis. George, as the eldest, began carrying himself with a kind of forced calm. He seemed to believe strength was expected of him. One night, he asked William whether a younger brother could become seriously ill without anyone outside the family knowing. That was not really a question about palace rules. It was a child asking whether silence meant danger. Charlotte noticed everything too. The lowered voices, the closed doors, the unfinished conversations that stopped when she walked in. She understood far more than anyone had fully explained to her. So she began leaving handwritten jokes beside Louis's bed. Because she had realized that even brief moments of laughter seemed to bring back the brother she recognized. Then, after overhearing staff discussing the growing public attention, she found Catherine and asked whether strangers were now worried about her brother. And then she asked something even more painful. Would Louis have to answer them? Those are not questions children should ever have to carry alone. Catherine was carrying her own burden. She was comforting Charlotte, reassuring George, and trying to keep the entire emotional center of the family from collapsing. She was hiding her own terror to protect William. And William was doing exactly the same for her. Their love remained solid, but exhaustion was turning tenderness into silence. And in the middle of it all was Louis, too young to understand royal protocol, but old enough to recognize fear in the faces around him. He had always been the child who filled quiet spaces with energy, questions, and laughter. As the youngest prince, he may have carried fewer immediate royal expectations, but inside the family he represented something deeply important: lightness, warmth, normal life. That is why his sudden weakness felt so terrifying. Then came the night everything reached its breaking point. After the children had gone to bed, Catherine placed two things in front of William. On one side was the palace-approved statement, careful, polished, safe. On the other were her own handwritten pages. The official version said all the right things. It mentioned recovery. It acknowledged progress. It protected privacy. But to Catherine, it felt empty. It described improvement without admitting fear. It spoke of progress without reflecting what the family had endured. And worst of all, it contained no trace of the boy at the center of it all. William read the opening lines and immediately shook his head. He reminded her that once a message becomes public, it never truly belongs to the family again. It gets replayed, analyzed, archived, discussed by people who have never met the child whose pain it describes. He asked her if she was prepared to see their son's recovery turned into public material. His voice rose, then stopped. Because the anger was not really anger. It was fear. But this time Catherine did not back down. She told him that Louis had begun to believe his condition was being hidden because the family felt ashamed. She pushed the polished draft aside and said the official language protected the institution, but it did not protect the child. She reminded William that George was watching every closed door, that Charlotte was leaving jokes beside her brother's bed because she understood laughter had become part of his healing. That silence was no longer protecting only one child. It was shaping all three of them. Then she told him the one thing that finally broke through. Louis had made a request of his own. He wanted to thank the medical professionals who had helped him feel safe. He wanted George and Charlotte to know that their love had mattered. And more than anything, he did not want people to think he had disappeared because he was not brave enough. William sat down. For a moment, he covered his face. And then he admitted something extraordinary. His decisions had not been driven only by privacy. They had also been driven by terror, by the fear of losing control. For a man raised his entire life to remain composed, it was a remarkable admission. That night, husband and wife reached a boundary together. Catherine could speak, but she would protect the medical details. She would acknowledge the seriousness of what had happened, without surrendering their son's dignity to public curiosity. There was only one person left who could still stop the message. King Charles. The draft was delivered to him after an evening briefing. He dismissed the room before reading it. Then he read it twice. When he reached the line about a child mistaking privacy for shame, he removed his glasses and set them down. The words unsettled him, because royal duty teaches restraint early. But children do not understand the cost of restraint in the same way adults do. Louis had been shielded from scrutiny, yes, but that same shield had begun to make him feel hidden. William arrived soon after. Charles asked him only one question. Did the statement truly serve Louis, or did it simply ease the fear of the adults around him? William defended Catherine's judgment, but he also admitted what would happen the moment the recording became public. The family would lose control of the story. Reporters would reconstruct timelines. Commentators would revisit absences. People would go looking for details the family had deliberately protected. A safer version had already been prepared by communications officials. But it removed Louis's wish to thank the people who had stood beside him. Charles rejected that version. He decided that a message stripped of the child's own meaning might protect the monarchy, but it would fail the person at its center. So he gave his approval. But on one condition. Louis had to hear every word before the recording was released. And he had to understand exactly what the public would know. Catherine read the final statement to her son in private. Louis listened carefully. Then he corrected one phrase. He did not want her to say he was merely doing better. He wanted people to know he was getting strong again. She changed it immediately. And in that one revision, the heart of the story became clear. Not weakness, not fragility, strength returning. Charles approved the final wording with a handwritten note that reportedly said, "Truth delivered with restraint can protect the crown more honestly than silence." Then the recording was released. Catherine spoke calmly. She thanked those who had protected Louis. She acknowledged the seriousness of the journey, and she confirmed that his strength was returning. The response was immediate. Phones rang. Headlines appeared. Messages flooded the palace. But something unexpected happened. The tone began to change. Yes, some broadcasters tried to build timelines from Louis's absences. Some commentators studied older footage and searched for clues. William switched off the television, refusing to let his son's recovery become entertainment. But outside the palace gates, another response was taking shape, and it revealed what the announcement had truly meant. Families began leaving handwritten blue stars outside Windsor Castle. Each one carried the same words Louis had chosen. Getting strong again. Soon there were dozens. Then more. Some were for Louis. Others were for children facing difficult recoveries of their own. Others still were messages from parents who recognized the fear, the exhaustion, and the desperate hope behind Catherine's words. Windsor Castle has witnessed celebration, mourning, and national uncertainty. But now its gates held something quieter and perhaps just as powerful proof that one family's fear had reached thousands of others. One newspaper placed Catherine's calm face across its front page beneath the words, "A mother's voice." And that headline mattered, because it did not frame Louis as weak. It did not frame the family as dramatic. It framed the moment for what it truly was, a mother choosing honesty over performance and compassion over protocol. Of course, some still demanded more answers. Why had the palace stayed silent so long? Why had the earlier absences not been explained? Officials responded firmly, "A child's health is not public property." The family had shared enough to acknowledge the journey. They were not going to surrender every private detail simply because the public wanted them. And when one phrase from the recording triggered a wave of renewed speculation, advisors suggested issuing a second clarification. Catherine refused. She said that explaining every frightening detail would violate the very privacy they had fought to preserve. But the real turning point did not happen in public. It happened afterward in private. William found Louis sitting quietly in the family's garden room. No doctors, no staff, no cameras, just his son. He ignored the chair and sat on the floor instead, bringing himself level with the child. Then he asked one simple question. "How do you feel now that people know?" Louis hesitated. Then he told his father something heartbreaking. He had noticed that William stopped discussing royal events whenever he entered the room. Those conversations used to sound exciting to him. During his recovery, they vanished. And slowly, Louis began to believe that people thought he would never be strong enough to take part again. William had removed every mention of duty to protect him from pressure. But in doing so, he had accidentally made his son feel excluded from his own future. That is the danger of silence. You cannot always control what it communicates. Then Louis revealed something else his father had never known. During the hardest week, he had heard William crying outside his bedroom door. He had pretended to be asleep because he did not know how to comfort him. That confession shattered the final layer of restraint William had been carrying. He pulled his son close and admitted that bravery does not mean never feeling afraid. It means speaking even when fear makes silence easier. And then, for the first time, Louis made a decision of his own about what came next. He said he wanted to return gradually. Not at a grand ceremony. Not as part of a carefully staged moment. He wanted it to happen at a small family engagement, somewhere George and Charlotte could stay beside him. Catherine entered after the conversation had ended. One look at William's face, one look at Louis, and she understood that something fundamental had shifted. Together, the parents agreed there would be no more pressure. No staged appearance. No forced return. Nothing until their son felt ready himself. When that day came, Louis's first return was quiet. It happened at a small family gathering, connected to a children's community project. There was no advance publicity. No formal speech. No demand that he perform confidence for the public. Before going inside, he paused. Charlotte took one of his hands. George took the other. Catherine did not urge him forward. She did not hide his hesitation. She simply waited until her youngest son chose the moment for himself. Then the three children crossed the threshold together. And in that instant, William understood something he had not fully understood before. Recovery does not mean rebuilding the exact image that existed before illness. It means creating a new sense of safety. He had once believed privacy was measured by how much the family withheld. Now he understood that silence could protect a child physically, while still leaving him emotionally alone. Catherine learned the opposite lesson. Honesty could free Louis from shame. But honesty could never become an excuse to expose every private detail. That is why she chose the personal recording. It allowed her to speak the truth without tearing down the boundaries her son still needed. Later, Charles reportedly admitted in a private family conversation that the monarchy had not been weakened by the disclosure. If anything, it had been strengthened, because it had faced hardship without turning pain into spectacle. And when Louis completed that quiet gathering and returned to his parents, he did not ask whether he would ever be allowed to come back. He asked when he could do it again. That was the final victory. Not a headline. Not a statement. Not palace approval. That question. Because it meant hope had returned before duty did. His recovery remained gradual but stable. And the family made their choice clearly. His health, his confidence, and his childhood would come before any ceremonial expectation. Catherine later received a photograph of the blue stars left outside Windsor. She pressed her fingertips to one message written by another child and quietly asked that the display be preserved for Louis. William read a letter from a father who had struggled to explain illness to his own children, and in that moment, he understood that their honesty had reached far beyond palace walls. Louis chose one star to keep beside his bed. Its message was simple. You were brave even when you were resting. And perhaps that is the line that says it all. Because Catherine's decision was never about rebellion. It was never about publicity. It was never about breaking royal rules for the sake of drama. It was a mother correcting the message that fear had created. It was a mother making sure her son would never confuse a private struggle with shame. For months, the family believed love meant building walls around him. What they learned instead was that real protection also requires listening, honesty, and the courage to admit fear. The silence had served its purpose, but then compassion required it to end. And when Prince Louis walked forward between George and Charlotte, not carried, not hurried, not shielded, something changed. Not just for him, for all of them. The fear no longer controlled the family. And that is why this moment matters. Not because the palace broke tradition, but because, for once, behind the institution, people saw the human heart.